As a boy, I looked at every passing car. I was fascinated by the sight and the sound of the great pre-war sports cars, especially names like Bentley and MG and Riley, many others also, but one that I particularly liked was the Alvis. As I grew up, I collected models of the various cars, and I continued to do that even into my adult life. In my 20s, I dreamed of putting all these cars into a book, and I started work on A Labour of Love. It eventually was published as the complete catalogue of British cars, a book that's remained in print continuously since then until today. One of the cars that really captured my imagination, perhaps more than any other, was the Alvis, and of the Alvis cars, the Alvis Speed 20 was the one which was the highlight for me. At that time, I was driving an Alvis TA14 as my normal everyday car. It was 20 years old at the time, but I loved that vehicle. But even though I was driving my TA14, I really wanted a Speed 20, but they were so expensive, they were very rare, very beautiful. And then one day I had a telephone call from a friend, Harold Lord, who is a member of the Alvis Club. And he said, "Peter, are you still looking for a Speed 20? I said, "Yes, I am. Why?" He said, "Well, I've got one for you." And my first question was, well, how much? Because I thought it was going to be an awful lot of money. And he said, £50. Now, £50 was a total bargain. And I immediately said, I'll have it. Especially when I learnt that it was the exact model of the Speed 20 that I loved the most, the open tourer body made by a firm called Cross & Ellis. My next question, however, to Harold was, what's wrong with it? And I will never forget Harold's reply. He said, well, first it was stolen, then it was crashed, then it was vandalised, then it was set on fire, and finally it was pushed into the River Mersey. He said, it's cost me £50 to get it out of the River Mersey, and you can have it for what I've spent on it. And so I acquired the bits. I acquired the remains of a wreck. It was a total wreck, and you wouldn't have really thought there was any hope of it ever being driven again. But when I looked at this wreck and I dreamed of what it might look like, I thought, if I can restore this car to make it look like it was originally, it would be a wonderful project. And so, full of vision, full of enthusiasm, I set to work. And it was the 18th of June 1970 when I finally stripped all the bits and pieces off the chassis of the car and got down to the bare steel chassis. And as I looked down the chassis frame, what I saw was that the chassis was bent. And you know, you can't drive a car with a bent chassis in a straight line. You can't stop it properly, it's dangerous. And as I looked at the bent and broken chassis and all the remains of the car and thought of all the work I'd done so far, I thought, I'll never be able to restore this broken car. And I confess that tears began to flow down my cheeks. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, I was covered in grease from head to foot, and suddenly I was aware of the presence of God in the garage. It was totally surprising because His presence was so real. And I was aware that He was saying something to me. And this is what He said. He said, you could restore this broken car, but I can restore broken lives. And then He said, which is more important, broken cars or broken lives? The answer was obvious. And that was the moment at which God gave me the vision for the restoration of broken lives, the vision for the healing ministry. Many years later, back in 1986, the work which has become known as LO Ministries began. But it all started at that moment when I saw the damage, and God spoke to me about the healing and the restoration that He wanted to do in broken lives. I look back now, 25 years after the work started, and see the reality of how God has taken people who were hurt in all sorts of ways, people who are abused, people who've been broken through trauma and through accidents, suffered rejection and pain and hurt, and they've walked through the doors day in, day out of LO Grange and all the centres now around the world. But as each one comes through the doors, they are a living expression of the vision that God gave as I looked at this broken car, as our teams have worked with them helping them through the difficulties and the problems, seeing the realities of the damage that has taken place, and then in prayer leading them through forgiveness and healing and restoration, and seeing them being set free, seeing them being restored as the Maker intended. When I did eventually restore the car, I had to get the chassis straightened. It went to a specialist engineer, but I got hold of a blueprint of the chassis as it should have been, and the engineers restored the chassis as the Maker intended. And that's what the healing ministry is all about, is restoring people's lives as the Maker intended. Seeing God put people back together, give them their own identity, restore their brokenness, seeing hope in their eyes, and seeing them given a new destiny as they've come back to that place where in God they are ransomed, healed, restored and forgiven, as the old hymn says. This is an amazing privilege to be able to see God heal and restore broken lives. Day by day we see this happening, and as we see it and as we experience it, I give thanks for that day when God spoke to me in the garage about the broken car, that he could restore broken lives. I trust you've enjoyed this short video. It tells a real story, but a real adventure with God, about how he has taken a vision and transformed it into reality and given people hope all over the world.